Hey, my name is Dennis Huntley, and I'm going to make a little movie on how to use epoxy and fiberglass to repair paddles or boats. And before we get started, we have to have the right supplies. And I have fiberglass down here, fiberglass cloth, and I have Dynel cloth right here. Dynel is a abrasion resistant cloth that's used in the tips of kayak paddles and canoe paddles. So that's what's on the tip of your paddles. Fiberglass is stronger. Dynel is more abrasion resistant. One of the things you want to do to prep your boat or your paddle before you start is to sand down the paddle or the boat where you're working to get it smooth and to get a rough surface. You want something that the epoxy will grab into. When you're prepping your boat, you can use really rough, hard sandpaper like 60 grit, or if you have something you really need to clean up, you can use a small grinder like this. You just have to be a little careful and go a little slower with the grinder. Another thing you're going to need besides the cloth is epoxy. This is West System epoxy resin 105. This is a 32-ounce can, and it costs about $50, not including the pump. If you buy a pump, you won't have to replace the pump. You just use the pumps over and over again. This is a small can of 205 hardener, West System 205 hardener, and it cost about $32. So looking at these two cans, that's $80 worth of supplies. Dynel cloth is about $22 a yard, and we're talking a 55-inch wide strip of this cloth, a yard wide, 55 inches by a yard. Fiberglass comes in little packets, and you can get it at the auto body shop or at Kmart for about $6 or $7. If you're going to start using the fiberglass first, now remember the fiberglass is stronger and resists punctures better and cracks, and the Dynel resist abrasion. And the benefit of Dynel also is that it's not scratchy like fiberglass. You know, if you cut the fiberglass cloth, you get these little fibers all in your skin, and it irritates, you know, you very much. So we're going to use the fiberglass first, and we'll just cut some strips. So I just take the cloth and my scissors, and very carefully I'll cut a strip of fiberglass. Off of the cloth. Now this is the first boat I'm going to work on today. This is a canoe that needs a grunch pad. And a grunch pad is basically just a layer of fiberglass or Dynel to give it some abrasion resistance when it's sliding over rocks on the river. This canoe is going to be used by Greg Nance and some others for river cleanups and other stuff, so it really needs to be sturdy and have a lot of abrasion resistance. If you come over here on the back of the canoe, it's hard to see, but I put a Kevlar grunch pad on the back of the canoe, and this is kind of heavy, and it's made the canoe heavy, but it's very sturdy, and nothing will tear this up. The Kevlar is both abrasion and crack resistant, but believe it or not, the fiberglass is stronger than the Kevlar as far as pure strength is concerned. If you make a boat out of Kevlar and hit it on rocks, it's easier to crack than several layers of fiberglass. So even though the Kevlar is lighter and you know, they make bulletproof vest out of it, 9 or 10 layers is enough to stop a 9mm bullet. But having said that, you'll find with a lot of experience that a couple of layers, a layer or two of Kevlar on a boat is just not enough to prevent cracks. You need fiberglass with the Kevlar, or a lot of fiberglass if you're really punishing the boat. I need more epoxy, so I'm gonna come back and give myself 2 more squirts. 1, 2, 1, 2. And I'll come back and mix it up good. Now I've got 2 layers of epoxy on there, and 2 layers of fiberglass, and I think for abrasion resistance, I'm going to put a layer of Dynel on there. Let's see if I got it about the right length. It's about the right length. This is not cut real accurately, and I might just cut a little piece off of there. Oh, by the way, Dynel is like cutting a piece of tin. It's very hard to cut, and you either have to have 10 snips or a good pair of scissors. It's not like cutting fiberglass. Fiberglass is easy to cut. So this Dynel is going to be my abrasion resistance part of the patch. And I'm going to leave it on the outside for abrasion resistance. And hopefully the couple of layers of fiberglass there will give it some strength. So I'm putting my epoxy on top of that, getting it nice and wet. Trying not to put any drips on there, but I'm kind of sloppy. You can see I'm sloppy. It's okay to be sloppy if you're me, but you got to be me. Now come here and look at this closely. It looks like I've just barely got enough fiberglass on there to get this soaked in, or epoxy, to get the cloth soaked in. But like I said, you don't want to put too much on there, really and truly. So let's just call it quits at that 4 ounces. And let's just say that's our grunch pad. 2 layers of fiberglass and 1 layer of Dynel for abrasion resistance. Now, my friends will be dragging this canoe over rocks and stuff. Hopefully that'll be enough. It probably won't be, knowing Greg. Anyway, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the saran wrap and I'm going to put it over the top of all of this and squeegee out the fiberglass to the edges. Now this is going to make a really smooth, neat patch. It doesn't look like it, but it will. Hand me those scissors over there. Thank you. Now, here's the secret. I'm going to take a wooden dowel and I'm going to smooth out the saran wrap, or the cling wrap, whatever you want to call it, cling wrap, saran wrap, it doesn't matter. Just that smooth stuff you put in foods. Now see how the I'm working the fiberglass out to the edges, and if you look, when I do that, all the bubbles in the fiberglass, in the epoxy, follow the dowel. So I'm working out bubbles and I'm working out excess resin. Now, as smooth as you see this slick surface, that's what it's going to look like when this is cured and I pull off the cling wrap. You don't pull off the cling wrap until it's cured. You'll notice I'm cleaning up some of the drips with a clean cloth. Some of it has just dripped down the side of the boat, and I'm just wiping it off, and I'm going to wipe it off the other side too, the drips. Now, here's the secret of getting a really perfect patch. When this cures just enough to pull the saran wrap off, it'll be about 2 hours later, and it'll be hard to the touch. Now, this hardener says fast hardener, and that means it'll cure in about an hour, but typically it takes, depending on the temperature, an hour or 2 hours to get hard enough to pull off the saran wrap without pulling off the patch with it. When you do that, the epoxy at that point will still be soft. And right over here, where all these drips are and all this epoxy is with the bubbles, that can be cleaned up with a window scraper like this and a razor blade, and you just come back and scrape off the epoxy, this excess, to make a neat patch. But you have to do it when it's still soft, because once it gets hard, it's as hard as steel and it's extremely difficult to sand down. So you have to be really careful to come back and get it while it's soft. And you can sand it down too while it's soft and make it smooth anywhere you want to make it smooth. So this is just like a really slick, smooth patch. Look at how slick that is. And that's the way it's going to look when I take this off. It's just going to be a really slick patch. And if you look at this in the back of the canoe, this was a very rough, thick piece of Kevlar, and I just used saran wrap on that to smooth it down, and you can see how slick it is. Now, I painted this to protect it from the sun, and this is another thing too. Typically with Dynel, you don't need to necessarily protect it from the sun, but fiberglass cloth degrades with ultraviolet radiation. And so I always cover up my patches with paint when I use fiberglass. And if I'm repairing a paddle, I'll just buy some paint that's the same color as the paddle and spray paint it over a little bit if I have a fiberglass patch on it. And that makes the fiberglass patch last forever if you cover it. Now, if you don't cover it, it will rot in the sun in about 4 or 5 years.